Hello, I'm Louis Meyers, and this is Meet the Author, where today we're going to be talking Sopranos. And of course, this is the great television series that ran from the late 1990s into the, I believe, 8 seasons into the 2007, 2008. My guest is Ray Richmond, who I'm going to introduce, and I want to show you this beautiful book, which came out, I believe, this year. It is everything you want to know about The Sopranos, both in terms of text and in terms of these gorgeous photographs, which throughout the book, pictures that people who love the show, I think, will enjoy. Sorry. And it's just full of these beautiful photographs. Let me introduce Mr. Raymond. Mr. Richmond. Mr. Richmond has worked as an entertainment journalist and author since 1984 and has been a television critic, columnist, Hollywood Awards expert, and reporter for a number of publications. He has interviewed many of the most famous celebrities and icons in the world, including Elizabeth Taylor, Lucille Ball, Shirley MacLaine, George Burns, Chris Rock, Martin Scorsese, Ben Stiller, Amy Schumer, Steve Carell, and Jimmy Kimmel. He has written several books, including a coffee table book on Betty White, the great actress, as well as this book on The Sopranos. He had a New York Times bestseller, The Simpsons, a complete guide to our favorite family, and he's also written a book about my favorite game show, Jeopardy! Mr. Richmond was born in Whittier, California, raised in Southern California. He graduated from the famous Hollywood High School and received a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism from California State University in Northridge, and is on with us from his home in Southern California today. Mr. Richmond, thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Louis. Thanks for having me. I just want a very quick little correction that actually the Sopranos ran for essentially 7 seasons, but they call it 6 because it was rather than 8 seasons. It was part 1 and part 2 of season 6, and the book actually came out toward the end of 2024. So it's been out a little while, but and it's done very well, especially with collectors.
Well, I'm very glad it has, because I thoroughly enjoyed it. So we're going to be talking about The Sopranos, and I do want to alert you, there are going to be a lot of spoilers, spoiler alerts here. If you haven't watched the series, you may want to hold off and watch this program online in a future date. But if you have watched it, we're going to be talking a lot about the people that were involved in making this great drama, how it came about, and some of the themes that it brought up. So it has been described in a number of reports as the greatest drama in the history of television. And I suppose that's arguable, but certainly many people feel that it is. And you obviously have a great deal of respect and admiration having done this book. Briefly, what made this show so great?
Well, it had a real cinematic tone and feel to it, Louis. I mean, it was very much almost like every hour felt like something that was cinematically drawn. And that was not a coincidence or an accident. That was how David Chase, the creator and showrunner throughout the show's run, had imagined it and had planned it. That he had gone to have a distaste for television, a disdain for it, and was trying to actually shift into, he'd done a lot of TV drama, a famed drama called I'll Fly Away, another one called Northern Exposure that he was involved in, that you may remember, about a lot of characters in an Alaskan village. And he wanted to shift into something that was a little bit more highbrow. But he was pitching The Sopranos around actually as originally as a feature film. And it caught the eye of HBO. after being rejected by Fox, and HBO said, we really think that this could have some legs as a series, and so he reluctantly agreed, thinking that television would ruin it because they ruined, in his eye, everything. And he always wanted to do some kind of mob drama, and one that with a kicker of having the mob boss being in therapy. Was of course the idea here for him that was different than, say, The Godfather or Goodfellas or anything that had come before. And it turned out, I mean, what he came up with was a masterpiece that ran for basically 6.5 seasons. Made a giant star out of James Gandolfini, and arguably almost as large a one of Edie Falco. And it was, I think it's the greatest drama in television history. As you say, that's arguable. I'm also quite fond of Mad Men and Breaking Bad, and several other shows. I would actually even argue that there's a show on the air right now that is one of the great dramas in TV history, and that would be The Pit, that's on HBO Max, about hospital emergency room. That's a terrific show. But not to divert from The Sopranos, which, again, I obviously have great respect and love for, and I'd be able to put my name on a book about the show.
The fact that it was on HBO is significant because HBO, I would also mention Band of Brothers, which I think was another great drama, which I believe was on HBO. HBO had a reputation for taking on controversial topics and dealing with them in very realistic, often graphic ways that could not be done on network television. David Chase himself grew up in New Jersey. He had some familiarity with issues around the mafia, not that he was involved in any way. But overriding theme is the mafia. You mentioned some of the other great movies about the mafia, of course, The Godfather, Goodfellas, Casino, A Bronx Tale. But what did he get right about the mafia, do you think, that perhaps some of the other movies did not?
Well, I think what he got right was that there's basically it's a group of crazy characters who often got in their own way. They were sinister, but they were also bumbling. Not that this was in any way, well, it was a comedy, and it was designed by David Chase as a very dark comedy. They were bumbling even as they were sinister and violent. They could never quite do anything exactly right. And, they were always scratching their heads trying to figure out why things didn't turn out the way they should have. And I think there was less of a, severe aspect to the show, even though there were certainly plenty of violent moments and more than their share of blood. It was really completely about characters and keeping those characters, through over 70 episodes of the show, keeping those characters fascinating and interesting and rich and different. Gandolfini was initially reluctant. They'd been wanting to cast him as a mob guy just because of the way he looked for a long time, and he fought against it because he didn't want to get typecast. When he finally gave in, he went all in, and was quite a beloved guy. Although there are people that will tell you that he was very difficult to work with. Incredibly generous with his co-stars and the people on the show, where he would give when there was a strike, he gave thousands of dollars to his co-stars without unprompted, as gifts to help tide them over. But he also would sometimes show up 4 hours late, hungover, to the set, which no one wanted to talk about with me, really, when I was researching the book, aside from one of the directors, a guy named Alan Taylor, who was not who didn't shy away from talking about some of the more difficult aspects of and I think it's fine to show both sides of a person, that he was wonderful in hindsight. Tragically died in his early 50s, Gandolfini, but by the same token, he could be difficult and full of himself, and he understood that the show revolved around him, and he took advantage of the fact that he didn't have to kiss anyone's butt, and they all had to kiss his, because without him, there's no show. But anything that I wrote that was even slightly negative about Gandolfini, they washed from the book. So there was a little bit of a sweetness and light aspect to it, and that was one of the things that was different about this book, I think, than other shows that had come before. It was less about the specific nuances of the show than about the whole itself, and the look and the feel and the richness and texture of the production.
One of the features of that show was it was character driven, and it was filled with an ensemble of amazing actors. And yet, as you write in the book, I believe, David Chase, the creator, absolutely insisted that every line be read exactly as it was written, that there was no ad-libbing. You see these scenes where they're just, at each other's throats, and you think they must have been ad-libbing some of this, but in fact, he wouldn't let them deviate one word from one line, which was interesting. I think that's a bit different than many television productions. It worked because the writing throughout was so remarkable. So you talked about the mafia. This was the northern New Jersey branch of the mafia. Let's talk about some of the other themes. You also mentioned that there was some graphic violence, and indeed, I don't think an episode occurred where there wasn't someone beaten or killed. Very realistic. The question is, in your view, was it gratuitous violence, or did the violence serve the story he was trying to tell?
I think the violence always served the story in the show. If anything, I mean, there were a lot of people that would actually criticize the show for getting too dreamy, or too getting off topic, as it were, and not being about they wanted death and doom, because this is mobsters, and that's sort of what they're known for. And David Chase was always careful not to infuse it with an over saturation of the violence. But even early on, I mean, the one thing that was, and everyone talked about, the most jarring thing that showed people, these are not lovable guys, was I don't know if you remember the college episode where Tony Soprano is driving with his daughter Meadow, played by Jamie Lynn Sigler, around to look at colleges, and he ran into a guy who was a rat from the past, who'd been in the witness protection program. He just found him, and when he finally killed him, while his daughter was off with some friends doing something, and strangled him to death, garroted him with a wire, and you saw the full horror of that death and of that killing right on screen. So they didn't shy away from the violence, but they didn't oversaturate the screen with it either. And that's one of the remarkable things about the show, Louis, is that they could show just how nasty these guys could be, but they were still beloved by the public. So it was just it was interesting how they were able to walk that line. Christopher Moltisanti, his nephew, was kind of a nasty guy, but he was beloved. You had Steve Van Zandt taking a little bit of a detour from his job playing guitar for Bruce Springsteen, playing Silvio Dante, and he was just a nasty guy, but everyone, they were able to play it so straight, so well that being able to show both sides of these guys, I think, was part of the secret of the success.
We're going to talk about some
Any
of.
show you look at in TV history,
Sure. And I want
yeah,
to.
any
We're
show
going
you
to.
look at, it's all about the characters and all about how they portrayed people. It's all
Absolutely.
about the characters.
So there was also, this being HBO, there was at least one sexual scene in each hour. Again, fairly graphic. They didn't have to, this wasn't network television. Including one episode, or perhaps two episodes, which involve a homosexual relationship, which I thought was done very sensitively. But in general, was the sex graphic? Oh, it was graphic. Was it gratuitous, or did it fit in with the show itself?
I think it fit in pretty well. Sometimes when they're in Bada Bing Club, where you just had the women walking around, very casually walking around naked because they were servicing Tony's mob friends. Sometimes I thought, do they really need to be naked walking around? That was, designed to titillate a little bit the audience, I think. But for the most part, no. I mean, the sex, Tony was always getting some on this, and his his long-suffering wife Carmela always knew that he was screwing around, and it was but that was the life she signed up for. And I think one of the more fascinating aspects of the show is the way women were depicted. That these women trying to survive in this violent, incredibly misogynistic, world of men, and how they suffered, and how they had to take a back seat and show themselves to that they did everything they could to survive, but they were also at the same time a little bit fascinated by it. That was what they signed up for, and they kind of knew it, and so they had to accept the downside of it, which was that their men were never going to be, never going to be straight and loyal to them. And like you said, it was also interesting that they alluded to a gay character, which I think was done quite tastefully. And for the most part, at the beginning of the show, as David Chase told me in our interview, they would have never depicted anything like that, because this was such a negative world toward anything like that. That they were straight guys, and it was all about the women, banging the women. But as the show went along, they were able to. I think society shifted a little bit, and the show shifted with society. That they were able to show that and do it in a tasteful way, and without making it overly titillating as well.
Yeah, I think the relationship between men and women is interesting in the show. In this sort of subculture, there is a certain. It was definitely a patriarchal kind of situation where the men made the decisions, at least most of the decisions. They treated the women at home generally well. I mean, and their daughters, and everyone was Han and dear, and they wanted to be called uncle by the children of other mafia family members. And then at the Bada Bing Club, which is the strip club that they're involved in another situation, they all have what they call gumars, or girlfriends on the side. Those women are treated like dirt, and in fact, very expendable. So there's that dichotomy, which was probably somewhat true to life, I would imagine, from that subculture.
I'm sure, yeah. The women who were the whores and the sluts, yeah, they treated them like dirt. But yeah, the whore Madonna thing.
Exactly.
They treated their, but they treated them beautifully to their face, and when they got caught, with their hand in the cookie jar, as it were. They would, bring roses and, buy them a condo, to make up for it, a vacation home. Carmela wasn't having any of that. She, ended up leaving and Tony for a little while, which I thought was also true to life because she was not to be trifled with, and she to him. But on some level, again, she also knew what she signed up for. But you also saw just how horribly these women could be treated. You remember Ralph Cifaretto and how he ended up beating to death a woman, the stripper girlfriend of his, when she told him that she was pregnant. That was not what he wanted to hear, and that was one of the more difficult and gut-wrenching parts of the show, was watching that episode and watching that happen. That was one thing my wife, actually, if she knew that I was watching that episode, when because I had to screen everything multiple times when writing this book, she was like, "Oh my God, I can't get that off the TV. I can't watch that." And but it was so well done that you were both attracted and repelled to this stuff at the same time. And that's a lot of the secret of the success of The Sopranos too, is that it drew you in, even as you were disgusted often by what you were watching.
You mentioned the word Madonna. Religion is another theme that runs through the show, with the exception of one of the characters named Hesh, who's an older Jewish man who has been a big-time record producer with mob connections. Everyone else is Catholic.
Right.
Everyone else is Catholic. These are, and of course, Italian background Catholic. And it's interesting the way that religion is there, and yet obviously these men are doing things that would not be condoned in any way by the Catholic Church. How do they square that?
I think, religion is a convenience for them. It was something to hide behind, to show that, they were still being loyal to their God and their Lord, even as they were doing these horrible things. You find a lot of this in actual society now too, Louis, where, not to get political, but you'll find people that justify things that our very president are doing, and they'll say, well, but he's a man of God and he's religious, and look, he holds the Bible, and they follow all these precepts. And I think that's how they justified a lot of their behavior, is they felt like they were on the side of right because they were spiritual and godly and devout on some level, except of course when it wasn't convenient anymore, and then they dispensed with that. Yeah, I mean, that was part of the hypocrisy of being mobsters, is that they were these soulful, spiritual guys, but by the same token, horrible and violent and complete animals in another sense.
Speaking of hypocrisy, the only priest who really takes any part, and those in the early years, is a young priest who has a fondness for wine, is always showing up when it's dinner time at the Sopranos family, and actually makes a somewhat drunken pass at Carmela, Tony's wife, when Tony's away. So he's supposed to be the paragon of virtue, and he's
Exactly.
obviously struggling with his vocation. It's interesting when you watch the men, and I suppose this is from their background. When they greet each other, they're kissing each other on the cheek. There's a lot of physical warmth between these mobsters, and yet in the next moment they may be shooting each other. It's a real, again, a dichotomy, which can be jarring. It's like, why are they kissing this fellow when they know they're going to be, killing him? What do you make of that?
That's what they did with the character Vincent Pastore, who played Big Pussy. You might remember that they took him on the boat because they found out he was a rat, so they had to get rid of him. And you could see that they were suffering. You could see that they were, that this was tearing them apart, that they had to do this, but they had to do it. because rats must die. That was, that's part of the code. That's part of the omerta. That if you're a rat, you're dispensable and you have to go. So that was the worst imaginable thing you could be, is someone who would think to the authorities. And I mean, and I think that's how it is in the actual, if we think there's still a mafia or a mob in New Jersey, that's how it is. The only thing you have to be loyal to is, the family, is them. And it doesn't matter how you treat women, it doesn't matter how you treat cops or friends or anything, but anybody that's part of the family, you know, you can justify any behavior as long as and until the family betrays you. And then if any family member betrays you, then they too are dispensable and must be disposed of. And that was so often how many of them ended up dead, because you could see that it happened with Christopher's girlfriend too, where they found out that she'd been talking to the FBI, and no matter how much she denied it, so she had to die too in an episode about three, four, episodes before the end, and that was incredibly jarring and graphic and difficult to watch, where Silvio ended up taking her out. And
yeah, you watch a guy that you've come to somewhat like, Silvio. He's the least objectionable of many of them, and yet he turns around and murders this young woman.
Yeah, and one of the great things about working on this book, Louis, was that I got to interview a lot of these people. Not obviously not Gandolfini, because he died of a heart attack about a decade before we started the project, but to be able to speak with Steve Van Zandt and Ada Turturro, who played Janice Soprano, Tony's sister, and Edie Falco, who everyone talked about was just a dream on the set, and knew her lines, and knew everyone's lines up, down, and sideways, and just was a total pro. And Steve Sharippa, who was Bobby, who was just a lovely man. And all of these people involved in the show would tell you that this was the greatest professional thing that ever happened to their lives. That to be able to be on a show like this, you get one of these per lifetime, only if you're incredibly, incredibly lucky. And, even years and years after the show had ended, this was still something that they were able to maybe still make some money from as personalities. It still led to other work for them in Hollywood and elsewhere. It was just a blessing and a gift that never stopped giving for them, all of them.
A couple more themes of the series that I wanted to talk about. One was psychiatry, and you mentioned up at the front what made this different was, here's this mob boss who, from the very first scene, I think in the whole series, we see him having a panic attack where he passes out, and he will occasionally have these panic attacks, and he goes to see a psychiatrist played by the actress Lorraine Bracco. She plays Dr. Jennifer Melfi.
Dr. Melfi.
Who is from
Right.
the same community, New Jersey. She is sort of, you get the sense she's risen above her beginnings. She's gone through medical school and residency and is now a psychiatrist, and yet somehow hasn't left it all behind. There was, a comedy some years back, Analyze This, with Billy Crystal and Robert De Niro, where they played it for laughs, where De Niro is a gangster who goes to see a psychiatrist. But this was more serious, because Tony was not only suffering from panic disorder, but when he went to see a psychiatrist, it had to initially be done in private, because it was seen as a sign of weakness among this alpha male community, and also they worried that could he be spilling some of their secrets. I will tell you, I'm a medical professional, so a physician. I've worked with psychiatrists many times over the years. I did have some, this is the one area where I did not think it rang true. I did not think she was a particularly good psychiatrist. She did help him by giving him some medication, which helped reduce his panic attacks, but in their counseling sessions, which goes on for the entire series, 6 to 7 years, she always seemed out of her element to me. And By contrast, the one who really I think was a good psychiatrist is her psychiatrist, Dr. Kupferberg, who's played by the great director Peter Bogdanovich.
That's right.
And he actually is on point
Right.
with her. He's direct, he's intuitive, he really makes his points clearly, whereas I think she, in the series, she seems to feel certainly ill at ease with this gangster and not knowing quite how to help him. And then at the end, somewhat unprofessionally, she just decides, I can't help you, and she dismisses him without any warning, sends him out the door, which is, near the end of his life as well. So talk to me about that. How did you see the way psychiatry was portrayed?
Well, I saw it a little bit of a different way, Louis. I understand, and you're no doubt correct that this is not true to life to how an actual psychiatrist or therapist would act. Well, psychiatrists, again, in my experience, for the most part, their job is to prescribe medication rather, rather than a psychologist who's much more about actual therapy. But I felt like the idea that Dr. Melfi was out of her element, I think, was clearly part of the plot and part of the storyline. She was not necessarily meant to actually help him in the story. I think she was designed to be a little bit of a foil, someone who was struggling, showing a different side of Tony and struggling to, come to terms with the fact that she's, that she's putting all of her own ethics and morals on the line, even by trying to treat this man. And I think Lorraine Bracco was brilliant. And in fact, when I interviewed her, she admitted that this was the toughest acting gig she'd ever had, because she had to be so control. And as a performer and as a person, she's all about just letting it all hang out, crazy, letting her out. And here she had to be the exact opposite, hold it all together. So in that sense, it was a real acting challenge for her. But I always imagined that the therapy was all just about to show, in part, Tony's disdain for humanity and his disdain for anybody who would try to rein him in or hold him together or hold him accountable. And maybe somebody that would display some dark comedy as well at the same time. And I agree with you. Peter Bogdanovich and Dr. Kupferberg were exactly much more in line with regular realistic therapy. And I thought it was a great touch to have the therapist have a therapist, because she was clearly always grappling with, why am I doing this? How can I do this? And then after she gets raped, you may remember that episode, Louis, where she's sexually assaulted in that parking garage, and she has that moment, one of the great moments of the show, where is she going to tell the mobster that she was raped and who he is, and know that she would be damning the guy to death, because clearly Tony would rub him out almost instantly for doing that to his therapist. And she says, no, I'm fine. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to go down this road. So that was the one line she drew in the sand. And I thought that was, it made for fascinating drama, if not realistic drama.
No, I agree with you. And in that same moment, you see a very compassionate side of Tony Soprano. He knows she's suffering. He doesn't know exactly what's going on, but there's some real human concern there. So
they were, she was the big star initially, Louis. Sorry to interrupt. She was, when they hired her, it was sort of like, they asked her, what do you want to do? Because she was, an Oscar-nominated actress, and no one else from the cast had nearly that kind of clout that she did, long before James Gandolfini or Edie Falco or anyone. So, what do you want to play the lead? You could play Carmela, and she's like, no, I want to be the therapist. That's my biggest challenge. So I thought that was interesting.
And you talked a little bit about Edie Falco, who is probably my favorite actress, actually. She's been in so many good movies, so many good TV series, but her character of Carmela was absolutely tremendous. How she inhabited that role and really made a statement. Can you talk a little bit again about who was Carmela Soprano and what impact did she have on this show?
Well, Carmela Soprano was a powerhouse in her own right. Her husband, uh, kind of tried to dominate her, but was a little scared of her at the same time. She was able to really stand up to some degree, ultimately stand up for women and for rights within a almost impossible situation. With so much misogyny and sexism surrounding her. She was a proud woman who had, who had kind of sold her soul for this life. She loved the life she was getting. She loved the money. She loved the status, even though everyone kind of knew her husband was a mobster and a mob boss. And she defended him when she wasn't, when she wasn't behind closed doors. She defended, but she was, she did her, she did her, she knew that she had sold out, and so she was constantly trying to justify the decision. And I thought it was interesting too. There was one time when she was, you may remember, there was someone that she was trying to, when she was searching for a therapist herself, and the therapist basically said, "Your husband is a mobster. You got to look at the life you have here." And she, basically told him to get bent because of that. And then she ended up, of course, going to Dr. Melfi, which was hugely uncomfortable in its own right. She both understood the deal she'd made with the devil and in denial about it at the same time. And that was a fascinating character to watch. She's just a phenomenal actress. She did an amazing job in another series after that show went off called Nurse Jackie, where she was basically a nurse with, hiding a heroin addiction. And, when I spoke to her, she just said that this was, the greatest experience of her life. And she just felt incredibly fortunate to have had it.
The relationship she and Gandolfini created on screen, this marriage that we watch over 6 or 7 years with its ups and downs, including a separate period of separation, it struck me as, obviously bigger than life, but some of the same conflicts that many couples have. Even down to the picayune where they have a fight over orange juice. She goes to the store and gets some orange juice, and he says, "Well, I like it with some pulp," and you got no pulp, and so she ends up throwing it at him. So there was a sense of a real couple here that they were able to. And I know on screen, I've read in your book and others, they were very professional. They didn't spend a lot of time together. They weren't really friends off screen, maybe purposefully or
Correct.
otherwise. But on screen, they created a chemistry that you really saw them as a couple. You also saw them as parents, and I think their two children, one played by a young woman, Jamie Ziegler, who actually was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during the years that this was being filmed.
That's right.
And then the young guy who plays her younger brother, who we watch from literally being a sort of a pudgy 13-year-old. By the time the show ends, he's about 20, and he's got a mustache and beard, and he is physically grown up, if not emotionally. But the parenting they did was very loving, both of them. I think Tony Soprano would not have been a bad dad. Not a bad dad to have, other than the fact that he was a mobster. But at home, he was a good dad, and she was a wonderful mother.
Exactly right. Yeah, that was part of the dichotomy. Is can a mobster in therapy actually still be a good parent and role model? And except for the fact that he spent some of his time, carrying out vendettas and killing people. He was a good, caring, good providing father. And you know, his wife was also a terrific mother who, who was always kind of pulling out her hair and trying to figure out how to reconcile all this stuff, and defending him. And there was a great moment in that same college episode I brought up earlier, Louis. Do you remember where Meadow asks him, are you in the mafia? And he's like, mafia? What are you talking about? There's no mafia. And sort of like, so he was always, except for this big lie, at the heart of the relationship. He was a good father and a caring father and would do anything for his kids.
Very few television series or programs really look at the development of young people. It's usually on the adults. And in this show, you see Meadow Soprano, his daughter, really grow in from a sort of, feckless teenager into an intelligent young woman who plans to become a lawyer, a public defender. And the son, is struggling to find his way, but you see him as a real young person, and that's hard to do. I think that's hard writing to do, and we don't see it very often.
To show the evolution of young people from gawky and moody teenagers into mature young adults, or at least semi-mature young adults.
Sure.
They made that attempt to do that, and that was admirable. There's, Louis, there was such a giant, community of characters and actors in this show, and just incorporating all of them and having them all be meaningful and interesting was such a trick that was difficult for David Chase to pull off. And that was, some of what I discovered in my interview with him, which I really appreciated. He's generally pretty closed-mouthed about his motivations and why he chose certain things. I'll tell you one thing he's certainly closed-mouthed about is what the ending of the series meant. And everyone, I think it's brilliant that, it ends on a big question mark. Right, exactly. That we don't know.
In television history, and again, spoiler alerts if you haven't seen it. But at the end of the show, Tony's life is unraveling now. He has basically lost the war against the New York Mafia. All of his top lieutenants have been killed. One of them looks like is going to turn state's evidence, and Tony will either have to go on the lam, as they say, or probably go to prison for a long period of time. And he gathers his wife and children in a diner, and they're having what turns out to be a last moment. And then you want to describe the ending?
Yeah, the walls are all kind of moving in. He sees, he sees out of the corner of his eye somebody that could well be a hitman who goes into the bathroom. Then guy comes out of the bathroom. Tony's, on red alert, knowing that he probably shouldn't have taken the family into the restaurant to begin with because he's being targeted. The walls are closing in. So and then it all goes black, and we don't know what happens. And I think that's brilliant because everyone then has their own theory, and it all just ends on such a big question mark, and so such a vague area.
What is your thoughts about the ending?
I think it was brilliantly done, and we are still talking about it. How many shows that have ended do you still talk about the method of the ending of the show? So that tells you how brilliant it was. My own personal theory: Bathroom pulled an automatic weapon out of his waistband and wasted the whole family. But we will never know that, and we didn't hear anything. We didn't see anything. So it could have been just as well that the guy walked out and they went on the lam and they all survived, and we'll never know. It doesn't even matter what David Chase says at this point, because the ending is the ending and you can't change it. So what do you think happened, Louis?
Yeah, I do believe Tony was shot and killed, and I hope that his family wasn't. That would not be the typical mafia ending. They usually spared the family. but clearly they were in the line of
Unless
fire.
they really hate him.
They were in the line of fire, and their lives would be forever altered by not having him in their life. Before we end, I had made a note, and I think it's worth going back. I wanted to talk about the way the feds are portrayed. This would be the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office. You know, in the old days, you turn on the FBI when we were growing up, the Ephraim Zimbalist, and the FBI was always the good guys. The feds do not come across in general as so wonderful in this series. And the reason is they don't seem to have a lot of compassion or conscience in what they're doing. Their method is to use RICO, which is a legislation was, I think, passed in the 90s, which now could target entire organizations along with just individuals. So what they would do would be arrest someone close to the guy they want to get, throw the book at him, tell him you're going to prison for 50 years unless you wear a wire. And in every case, the people that wore the wires ended up being discovered and killed. And the reaction of the feds was usually pretty cold. You know, they saw these people as expendable, and they sort of, oh, well, that's too bad, and let's move on to the next one. So I don't think they come across, with the exception of maybe one FBI guy who you warmed to a little toward the end, but they don't come across as that admirable, even though they are chasing the bad guys. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you. They are not the white knights that were portrayed by Ephraim Zimbalist and company on the FBI, a Quentin Martin production back in the day. We saw what they did in, their idea is to trap the smaller fish. No one more than Adriana, played by Drea de Matteo, who is the one that ends up, where she's just like, she finds out that a woman that she thought was her best friend, and it turns out she's a fed, and she's been entrapping her and using her. And it's sort of like, once you get caught up in that world, all bets are off, and you don't know who to trust. And I think the reason David Chase portrayed the feds as so negatively is that it feels like everybody's dirty, and this is, there's no heroes here. There's no positive here. This is all just dirty and slimy and awful. And, there's no one who's admirable. So, and I think that's probably, reasonably accurate. I think the people that work for the feds, their job is to get these people at all costs, and it doesn't matter how much they take them into their confidence and how horrible their betrayal is. I think that, that's all part of the intrigue of this and the cat and mouse game that's played on both sides.
Amidst the darkness, as we've talked about in this hour, there was tremendous feeling, sensitivity, character development, writing, acting, photography, cinematography, just one of the all-time great television programs. We talked before that we came on that must have been a very different experience in from 1999 on, before you could binge some of these shows before they were online. People would have to see an episode and then wait a week for the next one. It was sort of water cooler conversation. Now people can sit down and watch a number of episodes at one time. My personal bias is that it was probably better the initial way, where you had to wait a week, because life doesn't happen. Right. Life doesn't happen in binge-worthy. But nevertheless, it is out there, and I would encourage people if you haven't seen The Sopranos, give it a chance, and certainly give this book a chance. Probably see the show first and then read the book, but it is such a great show, such a great book, and I want to thank you for being with us today. And we will. It lives on. And your book will help it do so. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Louis. This has been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We will see you next time on Meet the Author.